Hi, I'm Sasha Moore, and I'm here with Jon Corbett, who I know from Aquamore, who has kindly offered to be in the hot seat today to talk about embracing risk, which is the theme for our upcoming webinar on the 19th of August. So, welcome, Jon. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Sasha. Thanks for the opportunity to come on.
Absolutely. Well, we'll see if you think that at the end. So, Jon, I want to pick your brain about three things. First of all, when you've embraced risk, how it's paid off, and how it's created some impact. So, over to you.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go back almost to the very start of my professional white collar career, if you like. I was one of a large number of a large cohort of university students that had the fortune or otherwise of finishing during the start of the global financial crisis. And you might recall that era across all the prof services firms, the big finance companies, the banks, etc. Overnight between sort of 2008 and then 2009, literally one by one, they all wound back their graduate intakes. So I can remember that pre-GFC boom where all these big companies, big four accounting firms, banks, law firms, they all come out and visit you at university with lots of merchandise and lots of people telling you how good it is to work there. And by 2009, that had all completely dried up. The universities didn't even run the open days that year, and it did mean that for a lot of us who had the timing of finishing that year in particular, you had to work out what to do with your career in the short term. A lot of people travelled, a lot of people extended their time at university, went and pursued further honours. For me, I was always sort of relatively keen to chance my arm outside of Melbourne. I grew up down in Melbourne. I went to school down in Melbourne, went to university in Melbourne, and all my friends had done the same thing. And I really wanted to try something different and mix it up. So I actually went ahead with a graduate program with the federal government in Canberra, which at the time was certainly not a glamorous location to live in. It changed a little bit. Some of your listeners will have their own views on that, but I did get the opportunity to do a graduate program with the Department of Infrastructure and Transport. And in all honesty, it was one of the better things I've ever done. So the first thing I'll say about moving in general, but certainly moving with like a federal government or a government employer, is that you are really well supported in a graduate program. You make friends from all around the country, so you're well and truly out of your comfort zone, but you make friends from all around the country. There was a generous kicker. They had a much better superannuation benefit than the average employer did as well. And you are at the center of policy making, so it's a really exciting space as well. In terms of where it led me, so I spent the first year in that department, and without going into political history on this show, in 2010 there was a federal election that was a hung parliament. It meant that there were three politicians from regional Australia who had the balance of power, and they were able to create a department purely for regional Australia. They were able to trigger that, which ended up being where I went. So I was involved in some of the most fascinating issues, like the Murray-Darling Basin, the repair plan there, and certainly a lot of other topics that directly affected people outside the metropolitan cities. Really interesting insights, really great access for my career. But where it paid off for me was just the ability to influence people from around the country, and that meant that when the time came to go back into finance, I was able to do that within Canberra, where there was not a lot of banking talent, and ANZ came calling, needing to replace a departing relationship manager there, and they gave me the opportunity. From there, working in Canberra, everyone within ANZ who needed to be in Canberra for government relations purposes or any other purpose would pass through our humble little office. And that gave me access to great networks within the bank in Sydney and Melbourne. And when it came time for me to progress my career and move to a bigger city, I already had great networks. I ended up having a 10-year career at ANZ, which was fantastic, and across all three cities, Melbourne, Sydney, and Canberra. And a lot of the networks and the friendships I still have to this day stem from that particular era and some of the choices I made about being brave, moving to a new city, moving to a city that wasn't necessarily glamorous, but which really was in the intersection of everything else.
That's incredible. I did not know that about you. I
I
thought
held
you
that
were
back.
classic finance through and through. But I really love your tenacity, and I really love your longer vision with that. And in terms of when you were deciding to make sort of that lateral short-term move, did you have the support of your friends and family in university, or were they quite resistant to the concept?
So it's a very interesting question. We now know that you and I definitely did not discuss this beforehand. So look, no, there were a lot of friends who thought, A, they were obviously disappointed that I was leaving them, but B, that why would you go to Canberra? What opportunities exist in government? Well, it couldn't have been further from the truth. I've been able to make friends from all around the country, which has made me a more rounded professional. But the other thing is you literally learn so much in there. So and you get that opportunity that you just wouldn't get in a traditional pathway down in Melbourne. And I do think that being at the center of government, that ultimately is where people at the end of the day, when they progress in their careers, at some point government becomes relevant, right? So to have that understanding of how that all works, even if I needed a lot of convincing a lot of time to convince my friends and my family at the time, I think to have that in the rear view, it shows it was totally worth it.
No, that's fantastic. Well, I definitely know who I'm going to be approaching if I need a quasi-political commentator. So what would you suggest then, particularly, I guess it doesn't really matter if somebody's sort of earlier in their career or perhaps in sort of that mid-career hump. What would you suggest, or what insights have you taken that would really empower someone who was sort of looking at either the geopolitical environment or perhaps in their microcosm that they are more limited? What insights would you have to empower somebody who is in that sort of crossroads stage?
So I think there was a big complex answer that I gave before, but fundamentally that it starts with being willing to move, to physically move your location. Because if you're only ever looking for an opportunity in your own neighborhood, if there isn't one, you're going to end up frustrated, right? So being willing to move and think about living in a different location, you'll make new friends. It will be hard at the start, but you are thrown in the deep end and you teach yourself to swim and you learn a lot about yourself. So I would say that if the job is right and the employer is right, don't be afraid to move locations. It's not going to be for everyone. People have family considerations, have kids, have partners who might not be able to move. But if you are in that stage in your career where you have the ability to do it, don't be afraid. Employers will always support you. A good employer will always support you with making sure you've got temporary and then permanent accommodation and things like that. And the beauty of moving within Australia is that if you do need to go home, you're only ever one flight away.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much, John. I really appreciate your insights, and I'll look forward to seeing you at the webinar.
I look forward to hearing more of these interviews. Thanks a lot, Sasha.